In August of 1982, 7 Soviet military divers descended into the waters of a lake in Siberia. 3 never returned. 4 were left paralyzed for the rest of their lives. What they saw at 50 meters beneath the surface was classified by Soviet military intelligence for a decade. Today, that report sits in a public archive of the United States government in the files of the CIA under the search code USSR reports, UFO sightings. But the 1982 incident was not the first. It was the latest entry on a list the USSR had been compiling since the 50s, and the people who have lived on the shores of this lake for millennia had been compiling it for far longer. This is Lake Baikal, and to understand what happened here, one must descend, and at the end of this video, something is waiting. It does not appear in any other descent. The lake lies in the heart of Siberia, 30 million years old, the oldest and deepest lake on the planet, 1,642 meters from its surface to the deepest point ever measured. If you could empty every other freshwater lake on Earth, Baikal alone would not run dry. It holds approximately 20% of all the liquid freshwater on the planet. It is not a lake, it is an ocean pretending to be one, and like every ocean it hides things that by every law we understand should not be there. In its waters lives the Nerpa, a seal, a single species. It is the only freshwater lake in the world that has seals. Nobody knows how they arrived. They are thousands of kilometers from the nearest ocean. Biologists have proposed impossible migrations, routes that no longer exist, prehistoric rivers that dried up millennia ago. No theory ever quite closes. The seals are simply there, as if someone had left them or forgotten them. And alongside them, marine sponges, deep water crustaceans, an entire oceanic fauna living in a mountain lake at 1,700 meters of altitude. A biological contradiction we have spent a century trying to explain. But biologists were not the first to notice that something didn't fit. The Buryat people already knew, thousands of years ago. The Buryat are the native people of the region, herders, shamans, guardians of the lake from long before written records existed, and from long before that as well. They have kept precise legends about what lives here. They speak of luminous beings, glowing bodies that rise from the water and fly into the sky. Round shapes, ovals, capable of moving through water and through air interchangeably, as if the two were the same element to them. These are not vague metaphors. The descriptions are consistent, repeated, passed down from generation to generation with the same care other cultures reserve for their sacred texts. And then there are the petroglyphs. On the rocky shores of Baikal, in zones dated to thousands of years ago, there are carvings, human figures looking upward, circular shapes rising from what appears to be water, vertical lines connecting a lower world to an upper one. Anthropologists call them shamanic art. The Buryat call them memories, oral memory of something their ancestors saw, or something the Buryat are still seeing, and that is why they still tell of it. Perhaps both, because what the shamans described as spirits, Soviet pilots would describe centuries later by very different names, though I have begun to suspect they were describing the same thing all along. The first official military report came in 1958. A Soviet Air Force pilot, flying over Baikal on a routine reconnaissance mission, reported a disc-shaped object emerging vertically from the water. The object ascended at a speed no known aircraft could reach in that decade. It emitted no detectable heat, it produced no sound, it crossed the atmosphere and vanished in less than 30 seconds. The pilot was interrogated for 3 days. His report was classified as military secret, and for nearly 40 years, no one outside the Soviet intelligence apparatus knew it existed, until the USSR collapsed. From 1991 onwards, parts of those archives began to come to light, and what was discovered was that the 1958 report was not unique. It was the first of hundreds. September 1964, a Soviet naval crew, conducting sonar exercises in the southern part of the lake, recorded for the first time something that would repeat many times after. A coherent sonar signal, solid, roughly the size of a medium-draft submarine, moving at 200 meters of depth. The signal held its course for 22 minutes. Then, without any prior deceleration, it disappeared, as if the object had ceased to exist. In 1964, the USSR knew exactly where every one of its submarines was. None of them were in Baikal, and no enemy submarine could have operated in a closed lake, 1,700 kilometers from any coast, without being detected during the journey. Whatever was moving beneath the water that September had no name, and it was not the only one. In the 70s, between 1977 and 1980, there was a wave of sightings over Baikal. Military pilots, personnel from naval bases, commercial fishermen, ground-based radar operators, all reporting the same thing, luminous spherical objects, roughly 5 meters in diameter, leaving the water, entering the water, moving between the lake and the sky with an ease that defied known physics. Some were captured on radar, others on camera. Most were seen with the naked eye, in restricted military zones, where there should have been nothing to observe. The USSR did not ignore these reports. It did the opposite. In 1978, the Ministry of Defense created a classified program called Setka, a word that in Russian means net. Its purpose was to systematically investigate all unidentified phenomena over Soviet territory. It received continuous military funding for 12 years, until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Setka was not an amateur group. It was directed by officers of the main intelligence directorate. It employed physicists, engineers, hydroacoustic experts, and deep sonar specialists. It had access to the entire Soviet military infrastructure, and it classified its cases by levels of priority, from simple aerial sightings with no contact to direct encounters with physical effects on witnesses. The highest category was reserved for aquatic phenomena, because flying discs are seen, and then they are gone. But something that lives in the water, that emerges and returns, that leaves a coherent sonar signal for 22 minutes, that crosses paths with military divers in restricted zones, that is not a sighting, that is a neighbor. The partial archives of Project Setka, declassified in the 90s, mention Baikal more than once, more than any other body of water in Soviet territory. Before 1982, Baikal had already accumulated several incidents classified in the highest category, direct aquatic encounters, not sightings. Encounters. What occurred in each of those earlier incidents never reached the public. The complete archives remain in some Russian military storage facility, if they still exist at all. But the pattern was clear, at least to the officers compiling the reports. Baikal was not just any lake. It was an active zone. And the USSR had known this for decades before sending its finest divers down to see it for themselves. And then came August of 1982. The exercise was not routine, although that is how the official report, declassified years later, recorded it. The 7 divers chosen were not any team. They were elite personnel of the Trans-Baikal Military District, trained specifically in contact protocols with unidentified entities. They had read the previous reports. They knew what Baikal had produced in the preceding decades. They went down prepared for something. Even so, it was not enough. They descended to 50 meters, reduced visibility, water temperature near freezing, almost total darkness, because at that depth, in cold freshwater, light penetrates only as a grey suggestion of itself. What they saw was not in the manuals. 3 figures, humanoid, roughly 3 meters tall, each of them, their bodies covered in what appeared to be a metallic surface, silver, without the visible joints a diving suit would have. No breathing apparatus, no tubes, no tanks, no visible system that could allow them to remain 50 meters beneath the water without drowning. They were still watching. The divers, following the protocol for an unidentified encounter, attempted to approach in order to photograph. One of them carried a capture net, standard equipment for biological samples. What happened next is described in the report that today sits in the CIA archives. Whatever they were looking at responded, not with an attack, not with a sound, with an invisible force that expelled the 7 divers towards the surface at a speed that should not be physically possible for a human body in water. 3 of them died before reaching the top. Their lungs collapsed from violent decompression. The other 4 survived, but with consequences that left them paralyzed for the rest of their lives. The survivors were interrogated for months. The final report concluded that the incident involved unidentified underwater entities of humanoid appearance and inexplicable physical capabilities. The document was classified. It was partially declassified in the 90s. Today, a translated version of the report sits in the CIA's Digital Archive Library, publicly accessible under the code USSR Reports, UFO Sightings. Anyone can search for it. Few do. Fewer still finish reading it. Unknown marine life in a lake that already has inexplicable fauna of oceanic origin. Enemy military technology camouflaged in Soviet territory during the Cold War, or something that fits into neither of those 2 categories, and so the USSR preferred to file the report away and let it die with the empire. The only thing we know with certainty is that the divers saw something, and that something did not want to be seen. But the 1982 incident is not the end of the story. It is merely the point where the story becomes impossible to ignore. Since the 70s, Russian sonar has detected massive geometric structures on the floor of Baikal, near Ulkan Island, the same area where the divers' incident occurred. The images are ambiguous. The resolution of sonar in that era did not allow for definitive confirmation, but the shapes are too regular to be natural geology. Square blocks, leveled platforms, stepped structures. Some Russian researchers have described them as submerged pyramids. Stepped structures, carved blocks. The same pattern reported on the floor of Lake Fuxian in China, where another impossible civilization left its stones before the water covered them. The Russian government has never authorized a complete underwater archaeological expedition. Requests from international teams have been refused. The official reasons speak of ecosystem protection. The unofficial reasons are not spoken of. There is something else almost no one covers. The fishermen of Baikal, especially the older ones, avoid certain parts of the lake. Not out of superstition alone, out of experience. They report that compasses behave erratically in certain areas, that fish vanish for weeks at a time with no apparent cause, that on calm nights, from the shore, something can be heard vibrating beneath the surface, a low sound, constant, that should not be there. And then there are the disappearances. In 1981, 1 year before the divers' incident, a Soviet Yak-40 aircraft vanished while flying over Baikal. No radar signal, no distress call, no wreckage. The search operation lasted months. Absolutely nothing was ever found. Not a single piece of the fuselage, not a fragment of the passengers. The lake returned nothing. Baikal is deep enough to swallow an entire aircraft and leave no trace, but it is also enclosed enough that something, eventually, should float. Something always floats, except in this case. If we put the pieces together, the silver humanoids the divers described, the underwater lights ascending against the currents, the pyramids on the floor, the disappearances without remains, the spirits the Buryat have described for millennia, a pattern begins to emerge that official science has been unwilling to name. What if all of these observations, separated by centuries and by cultures, are the same thing? What if the spirits of the shamans, the discs of the Soviet pilots, the humanoids of the divers, and the geometric structures on the floor of the lake are different testimonies of the same phenomenon? At this point, it becomes difficult not to think of the word that almost no one wants to say aloud when speaking of Baikal, the word that military agencies avoid in their reports, the word that official science treats as a professional insult: extraterrestrials, 3 meters tall, silver bodies, no breathing equipment at 50 meters beneath the water, capable of expelling 7 military divers to the surface with a force human physics cannot explain, seen by the same people the Buryat carved into stone thousands of years ago. When the evidence points so directly in one direction, calling the coincidence a coincidence begins to sound like an excuse, something that lives down there, that has lived down there, and that, whatever it is, has been here longer than the entire written history of our species. I think about the 7 divers every time I return to the report. 3 who died before reaching the surface, 4 who spent the rest of their lives paralyzed, never speaking again of what they saw, and a document most people will never look for, though it is there, available, free, for anyone with an internet connection. I have read it more times than I should have. I do not know what I expect to find each time. Lake Baikal remains where it has always been. It remains the deepest lake on the planet. It still holds seals that should not exist, lights that should not move against the current, Buryat legends that no Soviet historian was ever willing to finish translating, and a CIA document in a public library that almost no one has read. The USSR stopped investigating officially when it collapsed. Russia has not resumed the project. The surviving divers of 1982 died without ever speaking publicly again. And the lake, patient, cold, deep, continues to do what it has done for 30 million years. Wait. Whatever lives beneath Baikal has been here longer than our species, and we have only been watching for a few decades. In the chronicles of the void, the deepest lakes guard the oldest secrets, and Baikal has not yet finished telling us its own. And when it does, I am not entirely certain it will be speaking to us in a language we have forgotten, or one we never learned. What I promised for the end of this video is in the description below. The rest of the descent is yours.